Plato stands as one of the most influential figures in the history of Western philosophy. His ideas have shaped intellectual thought for over 2 millennia, forming the foundation for numerous philosophical traditions, political theories, and ethical frameworks. As a student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle, he occupies a crucial position in the evolution of philosophy. His work not only preserved the teachings of Socrates but also expanded them, creating a comprehensive system of thought that continues to be studied and debated today. Born in Athens around 428–427 BCE, Plato lived during a period of great political turmoil. His aristocratic background granted him access to some of the finest education available, exposing him to poetry, mathematics, and the teachings of earlier philosophers like Heraclitus and Parmenides. However, it was his association with Socrates that profoundly influenced his intellectual development. The method of questioning and critical dialogue employed by Socrates shaped Plato's approach to philosophy, emphasizing rigorous inquiry and the pursuit of truth. When Socrates was condemned to death in 399 BCE, Plato was deeply affected, and this event became a catalyst for much of his later work. In response to what he saw as the injustices of Athenian democracy, he sought to formulate a philosophical system that would provide a more just and rational way of understanding the world. Plato's most significant contribution was his ability to synthesize and build upon Socratic thought, while also laying the groundwork for his own philosophical doctrines. Socrates himself left no written works, and much of what is known about him comes from the dialogues written by Plato. These texts not only capture the essence of Socratic questioning but also introduce many of Plato's original ideas. Through dialogues such as the Republic, Phaedo, and Symposium, he explored themes of justice, the nature of reality, the immortality of the soul, and the purpose of human existence. In doing so, he moved beyond the concerns of his mentor and established his own distinct philosophical identity. One of the most enduring aspects of Plato's philosophy is his theory of forms, which proposes that the physical world is only a shadow of a higher, unchanging realm of ideal forms. According to this theory, everything in the material world, whether a tree, a horse, or a human being, is merely an imperfect manifestation of a perfect, eternal form. For instance, while individual horses may vary in size, shape, and ability, they all participate in the ideal form of horseness, which exists beyond the physical realm. This idea has had a profound impact on metaphysics, epistemology, and theology, influencing thinkers from medieval scholastics to modern philosophers. The notion that reality is composed of deeper, immutable truths continues to shape discussions on the nature of knowledge and existence. In addition to metaphysics, Plato made significant contributions to political philosophy, most notably in the Republic. In this dialogue, he presents his vision of an ideal state, ruled by philosopher kings, individuals who, through rigorous education and contemplation, have attained true knowledge. He argues that democracy, the system under which Socrates was condemned, is deeply flawed because it allows unqualified individuals to make decisions that affect the whole society. Instead, he advocates for a hierarchical society in which the wisest govern, warriors protect, and producers, farmers, artisans, and merchants, provide for the material needs of the population. This idea of a structured rational government has been highly influential, impacting thinkers such as Augustine, Machiavelli, and Rousseau. Plato's dialogues also address ethics, particularly the question of what constitutes a good life. He suggests that true happiness is achieved through the pursuit of wisdom and virtue rather than material wealth or physical pleasure. In works like Phaedo and Gorgias, he argues that the soul is immortal and that a person's actions in this life will affect their fate in the afterlife. These ideas contributed to later religious and philosophical traditions, particularly in Christianity and Neoplatonism, which adapted his notions of the soul and the afterlife to their own theological frameworks. Beyond philosophy, Plato's influence extends to science, mathematics, and logic. His academy, founded in Athens around 387 BCE, became one of the most important centers of learning in the ancient world. It attracted scholars from across Greece and beyond, fostering an intellectual environment that laid the groundwork for advancements in numerous disciplines. His emphasis on rational inquiry and structured education influenced Aristotle, who, while disagreeing with many of his teacher's conclusions, carried forward his systematic approach to philosophy and empirical investigation. The legacy of the academy persisted for centuries, serving as a model for later institutions of higher learning, including modern universities. Plato's dialogues are not merely abstract philosophical treatises, but are also works of literary brilliance. Unlike Aristotle's more rigid systematic style, Plato employed a dramatic, engaging format that made his ideas accessible and compelling. His use of characters, debates, and storytelling added depth to his philosophical inquiries, allowing readers to engage with complex issues in a dynamic way. This literary quality has ensured that his works remain widely read, not just by philosophers but also by scholars of literature, history, and political theory. His influence did not wane after his death in 347 BCE. During the Renaissance, a revival of Platonic thought took place, with scholars such as Marsilio Ficino translating and interpreting his works. The Enlightenment further saw the application of Platonic ideas in discussions on justice, democracy, and the role of reason in governance. Even today, his ideas remain central to debates on education, morality, and political systems. Plato's philosophical contributions extend far beyond his own era, shaping disciplines ranging from ethics and metaphysics to political science and epistemology. By preserving and expanding upon Socratic thought, he created a system of philosophy that has endured for over 2,000 years. His dialogues continue to be studied as essential texts, offering insights into the nature of truth, justice, and human existence. Whether in the halls of academia or in contemporary political discourse, his influence remains as strong as ever, reaffirming his place as one of the greatest thinkers in history. Plato was born around 428 or 427 BCE in Athens, a city that was not only the intellectual and cultural heart of Greece but also a major center of political power. His birth took place during a period of significant historical events that shaped the course of Greek civilization. He belonged to an aristocratic family, which granted him access to an elite education and positioned him within the upper echelons of Athenian society. This privileged background played a crucial role in his intellectual development, exposing him to literature, philosophy, mathematics, and politics from an early age. His family lineage was deeply rooted in Athens' political and social fabric, making him a natural candidate for political engagement, though he would ultimately choose a different path, one that led him to philosophy. Plato's father, Aristotle, was said to be descended from Codrus, the legendary king of Athens, while his mother, Pryxian, came from a family with strong political connections. Pryxian's lineage traced back to Solon, one of Athens' most revered lawgivers and poets. This noble heritage ensured that Plato received an education that was steeped in the traditions of Athenian aristocracy. His early years were likely filled with lessons in poetry, music, gymnastics, and rhetoric, all of which were essential components of a well-rounded Greek education. His exposure to the great works of Homer, Hesiod, and other poets would later influence his critiques of literature and art, particularly his views on their role in shaping morality and society. The Athens of Plato's childhood was a city caught between its democratic ideals and the harsh realities of war. The Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE, between Athens and Sparta was one of the defining conflicts of the era, and it would deeply influence his thinking. This war, which spanned much of his youth, saw the decline of Athenian power, the erosion of its democratic institutions, and the eventual downfall of the city-state as the dominant power in Greece. The war exposed the vulnerabilities of democracy, as factionalism, populism, and poor leadership led to disastrous decisions, including the failed Sicilian expedition, 415 to 413 BCE. These events would leave a lasting impression on Plato, shaping his later critiques of democracy and his vision of a just political system. The political instability of Athens during this time was exacerbated by internal strife. While the city prided itself on being the cradle of democracy, its political system was far from perfect. The democratic government often fell victim to the influence of demagogues, charismatic leaders who manipulated public opinion for their own gain. Corruption, shifting alliances, and the pursuit of short-term victories over long-term stability made Athenian democracy fragile. These shortcomings became even more evident in the later years of the Peloponnesian War, when Athens suffered devastating defeats and was ultimately forced to surrender to Sparta in 404 BCE. Following this defeat, the city experienced the brief but brutal rule of the 30 tyrants, an oligarchic regime backed by Sparta. The atrocities committed during this period, executions, exiles, and the suppression of free speech, highlighted the dangers of absolute power and further influenced Plato's distrust of both democracy and tyranny. It was against this turbulent backdrop that Plato encountered Socrates, the man who would become the most significant intellectual influence in his life. Socrates was a unique figure in Athens, a philosopher who did not write down his ideas but instead engaged in public debates, questioning established norms and challenging the beliefs of his fellow citizens. Unlike the sophists who charged fees for their teachings and often prioritized rhetoric over truth, Socrates pursued wisdom as a means of achieving virtue. His method of questioning, now known as the Socratic method, involved breaking down complex ideas through dialogue, exposing contradictions in conventional wisdom, and forcing individuals to critically examine their own beliefs. Plato, as a young and intellectually curious aristocrat, was drawn to Socrates' way of thinking. While he had likely been exposed to various schools of thought, including Pythagorean mathematics and Heraclitean metaphysics, it was Socrates who gave him a framework for philosophical inquiry. Socrates' relentless questioning of ethics, justice, and truth resonated with Plato, particularly as he witnessed the moral and political decay of Athens. It is likely that Plato saw in Socrates a model for how philosophy could be used to improve society, how rigorous inquiry and a commitment to truth could lead to a better understanding of justice and governance. Their relationship was not merely that of teacher and student, it was a deeply intellectual partnership. Socrates encouraged Plato to question everything, including the political structures he had grown up with. The older philosopher's insistence that true knowledge could only be attained through reason and dialogue became one of the foundational principles of Plato's later work. However, the association with Socrates also carried risks. Socrates was seen as a subversive figure by many in Athens, particularly those who had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. His refusal to conform to societal norms, his criticism of democratic governance, and his habit of exposing the ignorance of influential citizens made him many enemies. The situation reached a climax in 399 BCE when Socrates was put on trial for corrupting the youth and impiety. The charges against him were politically motivated, fueled by resentment and fear among the Athenian elite. Despite presenting a strong defense, Socrates was found guilty and sentenced to death by drinking poison hemlock. Plato was deeply affected by this event, seeing it as a miscarriage of justice and a failure of the democratic system he had been raised to respect. The execution of his mentor reinforced his belief that Athens' political structure was fundamentally flawed, leading him to explore alternative models of governance in his later works. In the wake of Socrates' death, Plato left Athens, disillusioned with the city's political climate. He traveled extensively, seeking knowledge from different cultures and philosophical traditions. His journeys took him to Egypt, where he encountered mathematical and religious ideas that would later influence his thought. He also visited Italy, where he studied Pythagorean philosophy, which emphasized the relationship between numbers and reality. These experiences broadened his perspective, allowing him to develop a more comprehensive philosophical system that integrated elements of metaphysics, ethics, and political theory. Despite his aristocratic heritage, Plato never pursued a career in politics. The execution of Socrates and the corruption he had witnessed in Athenian democracy convinced him that true change could only come through philosophy. Rather than seeking political power, he chose to establish the Academy, an institution dedicated to philosophical and scientific inquiry. Here he sought to educate future leaders, not through rhetoric or political maneuvering, but through rigorous intellectual training. Plato's aristocratic lineage, his exposure to the political instability of Athens, and his mentorship under Socrates all played crucial roles in shaping his philosophical outlook. The Peloponnesian War had shown him the dangers of reckless governance, while the execution of Socrates had demonstrated the vulnerabilities of democracy. These experiences led him to develop a vision of an ideal state, one ruled not by demagogues or tyrants, but by philosopher kings who had attained true wisdom. His philosophy was not merely theoretical. It was a response to the failures he had witnessed in his own time. By seeking to understand justice, ethics, and knowledge, Plato laid the groundwork for centuries of philosophical thought. Through his dialogues, Plato immortalized Socrates, ensuring that his mentor's ideas would not be lost to history. At the same time, he expanded upon these ideas, creating a system of thought that addressed fundamental questions about reality, morality, and governance. His early life and experiences provided him with both the intellectual tools and the personal motivation to pursue philosophy as a means of achieving a just and rational society. In doing so, he became one of the most important thinkers in history, bridging the gap between Socrates' oral teachings and the structured systematic philosophy that would later be refined by Aristotle. Socrates played an instrumental role in shaping the intellectual and philosophical development of Plato, serving as both a mentor and an inspiration. Socrates was unlike any other thinker of his time. He did not write any philosophical treatises, nor did he establish a formal school of thought. Instead, he engaged in public discussions, questioning individuals in the marketplace, challenging their beliefs, and forcing them to confront the contradictions in their reasoning. His approach to philosophy was radical because it prioritized critical thinking and self-examination over traditional teachings. His influence on Plato was profound, leading the younger thinker to dedicate much of his life to preserving and expanding upon Socratic ideas. Without Plato's dialogues, much of what is known about Socrates today would have been lost, as the older philosopher left behind no written records of his own. Socrates' primary philosophical method was questioning, often referred to as the Socratic method. This approach involved engaging in dialogues with others, asking probing questions to uncover assumptions, challenge beliefs, and lead individuals toward deeper understanding. Rather than lecturing or providing direct answers, Socrates would encourage his interlocutors to examine their own ideas and arrive at conclusions through reasoned discourse. His method was not intended to win arguments but to expose ignorance and reveal truth. This dialectical approach, which focused on continuous questioning and logical reasoning, had a profound impact on Plato, who adopted it as a key feature of his own philosophical writings. Many of Plato's most famous dialogues, such as the Republic, Gorgias, and Phaedo, use this method to explore complex philosophical concepts, showing Socrates engaging in discussions that ultimately lead to profound insights about justice, knowledge, and the nature of reality. Socrates was critical of the Athenian democratic system, believing that governance should be based on wisdom rather than popular opinion. He argued that most people lacked the necessary knowledge to make informed decisions about important matters. This perspective made him a controversial figure in Athens, particularly among politicians and those in power. He gained a reputation for exposing the ignorance of influential figures, often making enemies in the process. While some admired his intellect and relentless pursuit of truth, others saw him as a threat to traditional values and the stability of Athenian society. Plato was deeply influenced by Socrates' critiques of democracy and his emphasis on virtue and wisdom. Through his mentor, he came to see philosophy as a means of achieving a just and rational society. Socrates' insistence that true knowledge could only be attained through reason and dialogue shaped Plato's belief that philosophers should lead society. This idea would later become one of the central themes of the Republic, where Plato presents his vision of a state ruled by philosopher kings, individuals who, like Socrates, seek truth and wisdom rather than personal gain. The trial and execution of Socrates in 399 BCE was a turning point in Plato's life. Socrates was charged with corrupting the youth and impiety, accusations that were largely politically motivated. Many of his critics saw him as a destabilizing force, someone who challenged the authority of Athenian leaders and questioned the very foundations of the democratic system. Despite his opportunity to escape, Socrates chose to accept his fate, arguing that it would be unjust to flee the city whose laws he had lived under his entire life. He was sentenced to death and executed by drinking hemlock. For Plato, The death of Socrates was not just a personal loss but a profound philosophical and political event. He saw it as evidence of the failings of Athenian democracy, which he believed had condemned an innocent man simply because his ideas were inconvenient to those in power. The execution of his mentor left Plato disillusioned with politics and deeply skeptical of the democratic system. This disillusionment is reflected in his later works, where he argues for a political system led by philosophers rather than the uninformed masses. In the immediate aftermath of Socrates' death, Plato left Athens, traveling to different regions in search of knowledge. He is believed to have visited Egypt, where he was exposed to mathematical and religious traditions that would later influence his metaphysical ideas. He also spent time in Italy, studying the teachings of the Pythagoreans, who believed in the importance of numbers and their relationship to the structure of reality. These experiences helped broaden his perspective, allowing him to develop a more comprehensive philosophical system that integrated ethics, politics, metaphysics, and epistemology. Socrates' influence on Plato's work is evident throughout his dialogues. In Apology, Plato presents a defense of Socrates, portraying him as a man who valued truth and integrity above personal safety. Phaedo, another important dialogue, explores Socrates' final moments before his execution, delving into discussions on the immortality of the soul and the nature of the afterlife. These works serve not only as tributes to Socrates but also as a means of preserving and advancing his philosophical ideas. Plato did not simply record Socratic thought. He expanded upon it, developing his own philosophical framework. While Socrates focused primarily on ethics and dialectical reasoning, Plato introduced a more systematic approach to philosophy, incorporating metaphysical and epistemological elements. One of his most significant contributions was the theory of forms, which suggests that the material world is only a reflection of a higher, unchanging realm of perfect ideas. This theory was, in part, influenced by Socrates' belief in absolute truths, ideas that exist beyond subjective human opinions. Plato's philosophical journey was deeply shaped by Socrates' teachings, but it was also defined by his response to his mentor's death. The execution of Socrates pushed Plato toward the belief that only a society ruled by wisdom and reason could be truly just. His experiences with Athenian politics convinced him that democracy, as it existed in his time, was flawed and susceptible to manipulation by demagogues. He sought to create a system where knowledge and virtue, rather than popularity and rhetoric, determined leadership. Through his academy, which he established in Athens, Plato sought to train future generations of philosophers and leaders. The academy became one of the most influential institutions in history, attracting students from all over the Greek world, including Aristotle. Plato's goal was to ensure that the pursuit of wisdom continued beyond his lifetime, preserving the philosophical traditions of Socrates while expanding upon them with his own ideas. The relationship between Plato and Socrates was one of the most significant in the history of philosophy. Socrates' teachings provided the foundation upon which Plato built his own intellectual system. The Socratic method, with its emphasis on questioning and dialectical reasoning, became a cornerstone of Plato's approach to philosophy. At the same time, the trial and execution of Socrates forced Plato to confront the political realities of his time, leading him to develop a vision of governance that prioritized wisdom and justice. Through his dialogues, Plato ensured that Socrates' legacy endured. He did not merely act as a recorder of his mentor's ideas. He expanded upon them, creating a comprehensive system of thought that has influenced philosophy for over 2,000 years. His philosophical journey was a response to the injustices he witnessed in Athenian society, particularly the fate of Socrates, which reinforced his belief in the necessity of a rational and just political system. In this way, Socrates did not just shape Plato's thinking. He inspired an intellectual movement that would continue long after his death, shaping the course of Western philosophy. The execution of Socrates in 399 BCE was a turning point in Plato's life, shaking his faith in Athenian democracy and pushing him to seek wisdom beyond the borders of his homeland. The loss of his mentor left him disillusioned, and the political climate of Athens, which had condemned Socrates to death, made it difficult for a thinker like Plato to remain in the city without facing similar challenges. His departure from Athens marked the beginning of a journey that would expose him to diverse intellectual traditions, broadening his understanding of philosophy, mathematics, and mysticism. These experiences played a crucial role in shaping his philosophical system, laying the foundation for many of the ideas that he would later develop in his dialogues. Plato's travels took him to Egypt, a land renowned for its ancient wisdom, mathematical advancements, and religious traditions. The influence of Egyptian thought on Greek philosophy has been debated, but it is widely believed that Plato encountered Egyptian priests, who were the custodians of a long tradition of metaphysical speculation and moral teachings. Egypt was known for its structured and hierarchical approach to knowledge, where philosophy, mathematics, and religious thought were deeply intertwined. This exposure may have reinforced Plato's belief in a higher realm of abstract forms, an idea that would later become central to his philosophy. The Egyptians had long viewed numbers as sacred, and their mathematical precision, particularly in geometry, left a lasting impression on Greek thinkers. The importance of mathematical order and harmony in Egyptian temples and pyramids may have inspired Plato's later emphasis on mathematical reasoning as a key to understanding reality. Beyond its contributions to mathematics, Egyptian thought also carried a strong mystical element. The Egyptian worldview emphasized the immortality of the soul, ethical conduct, and the idea of an afterlife, concepts that align with some of Plato's later philosophical speculations. His dialogue Phaedo, which explores the nature of the soul and the possibility of its existence beyond death, may have been influenced by Egyptian religious doctrines. The Egyptians saw the cosmos as governed by a higher order, which could be understood through spiritual discipline and intellectual inquiry. This perspective resonated with Plato's growing conviction that the material world was only a shadow of a higher, more perfect reality. After his time in Egypt, Plato traveled to Italy, where he came into contact with the Pythagorean school of thought. The Pythagoreans, followers of the philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, were deeply interested in numbers and their connection to the fundamental nature of the universe. They believed that numerical relationships governed all aspects of existence, from music to planetary motion. Their view of the world as an ordered and harmonious system had a profound impact on Plato's thinking. The idea that reality could be understood through abstract mathematical principles reinforced his belief in the existence of eternal, unchanging truths beyond the physical world. The Pythagoreans also embraced a communal and disciplined way of life, emphasizing intellectual pursuit, ethical living, and the purification of the soul. They saw philosophy not merely as an academic exercise but as a way of life that could lead to enlightenment and harmony with the cosmos. This holistic approach to knowledge likely influenced Plato's vision of the ideal society, as described in the Republic, where philosopher kings would rule based on wisdom rather than personal ambition. The Pythagoreans' belief in the transmigration of souls, the idea that the soul could be reborn into different bodies, may also have contributed to Plato's own views on the soul's immortality and its journey beyond the physical realm. Plato's engagement with Pythagorean philosophy strengthened his commitment to the idea that reality is structured according to intelligible principles. Mathematics, in particular, became a central element of his philosophy. He came to see geometry as a bridge between the material world and the realm of forms, the perfect and unchanging ideals that he believed underpinned all existence. This influence is evident in the famous inscription attributed to his academy, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here." For Plato, mathematical truths were not mere human inventions but eternal realities that pointed toward the existence of a higher order beyond the world of appearances. His exposure to different philosophical traditions during his travels deepened his understanding of the relationship between knowledge, ethics, and governance. The societies he visited had different ways of organizing knowledge and structuring political life, and these experiences helped him refine his own ideas about justice, leadership, and the role of philosophers in society. While the Egyptian priesthood emphasized the preservation of sacred knowledge, the Pythagoreans sought enlightenment through intellectual discipline and communal living. These contrasting models may have influenced Plato's own vision of an ideal state, where rulers would be trained in philosophy and guided by wisdom rather than personal ambition or popular opinion. Plato's travels were not merely intellectual excursions. They were a search for a deeper understanding of the world, knowledge, and the soul. The wisdom he encountered outside of Athens convinced him that truth was not confined to any single culture or tradition. Instead, it was something that could be discovered through rigorous inquiry and rational reflection. His exposure to Egyptian mysticism, mathematical theories, and Pythagorean thought expanded his philosophical horizon, giving him the tools to develop a system that integrated metaphysics, ethics, and political philosophy. By the time Plato returned to Athens, he was no longer just a student of Socratic thought. He had transformed into a philosopher with a broader vision, one that combined the ethical teachings of Socrates with the mathematical precision of the Pythagoreans and the metaphysical depth of Egyptian philosophy. These experiences allowed him to establish his academy, where he sought to cultivate a new generation of thinkers who would approach philosophy not just as an abstract discipline but as a means of understanding and improving the world. The lessons he learned during his travels became the foundation of his later works, shaping his theories of knowledge, the nature of reality, and the role of the philosopher in society. His belief in the existence of a higher realm of perfect forms, his emphasis on reason and mathematics as paths to truth, and his vision of a just society all bear the marks of his intellectual journey beyond Athens. Through these encounters, Plato did not merely absorb different ideas. He synthesized them into a comprehensive philosophical system that would influence generations of thinkers, from Aristotle to the modern era. His time away from Athens allowed him to step back from the political turmoil that had claimed Socrates' life and gain a new perspective on governance and justice. The societies he encountered had different approaches to leadership, and these experiences helped him refine his critique of Athenian democracy. He came to believe that political systems should not be based on popular will alone but should be guided by philosophical wisdom. This conviction would later become one of the central themes of the Republic, where he argues that the ideal state must be governed by those who have attained true knowledge. Through his travels, Plato saw firsthand how different cultures approached knowledge and the pursuit of wisdom. These encounters broadened his perspective, helping him develop a philosophy that sought to integrate reason, ethics, and metaphysics into a unified system. His experiences reinforced his belief that true knowledge could only be attained through intellectual rigor and philosophical inquiry, rather than through mere tradition or political rhetoric. By the time he returned to Athens, Plato was ready to build upon the legacy of Socrates and forge his own intellectual path. The academy he founded became a center for philosophical study, attracting students from across the Greek world. His philosophical system, shaped by his travels and the traditions he encountered, would go on to influence not only his immediate followers but also the entire course of Western thought. Through his works, he preserved and expanded the ideas of his mentor while integrating new insights from the wisdom of other cultures. In doing so, he ensured that philosophy would remain a discipline devoted to the pursuit of truth, reason, and the highest forms of knowledge. After years of travel and intellectual exploration, Plato returned to Athens around 387 BCE, a man transformed by the philosophical traditions he had encountered. The death of Socrates had left a deep wound, and his travels had exposed him to different ways of understanding the world, knowledge, and governance. It was clear to him that Athens needed a space where philosophy could thrive, where students could be trained not just in rhetoric or politics but in the pursuit of truth itself. The result of this conviction was the foundation of the Academy, an institution that would become one of the most significant centers of learning in history. The establishment of the Academy was not a mere attempt at recreating the Socratic tradition but an expansion of it. Plato envisioned a place where philosophy would be pursued systematically, where students would engage in rigorous dialectical reasoning and mathematical training, and where the pursuit of knowledge would be treated as a lifelong endeavor. Unlike the sophists, who taught rhetoric as a means of persuasion, Plato's academy aimed at cultivating wisdom. The method of instruction was not based on rote learning or memorization but on questioning, reasoning, and seeking deeper understanding. He believed that truth could only be reached through critical thinking and that education should shape not just the intellect but the moral character of the individual. The Academy's curriculum reflected Plato's broad philosophical vision. Mathematics played a central role, inspired by his encounters with Pythagorean thought. He saw numbers and geometric principles as the keys to understanding the underlying order of the universe. Geometry, in particular, was essential because it dealt with abstract truths independent of the material world, aligning with his belief in the existence of a higher realm of perfect forms. The famous inscription attributed to the Academy, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here," reflected this emphasis on mathematical reasoning as a foundation for higher philosophical inquiry. In addition to mathematics, the Academy placed significant emphasis on ethics, metaphysics, politics, and logic. Plato believed that philosophy was not just about abstract speculation but had real-world implications for governance and human life. His dialogue The Republic outlined his vision of an ideal society, where rulers would be philosopher kings, individuals who had undergone rigorous intellectual and moral training and who were capable of leading with wisdom and justice. The Academy provided the space to refine and test these ideas, and it became a place where students learned to think beyond personal ambition or political power struggles, focusing instead on the pursuit of knowledge and virtue. Science also played a role in the Academy's curriculum. Though the modern distinction between philosophy and science did not exist at the time, Plato's institution explored natural philosophy, astronomy, and physics. The influence of pre-Socratic philosophers, as well as Pythagorean mathematical insights, shaped the Academy's approach to studying the natural world. While Plato himself was more inclined toward metaphysical speculation than empirical observation, the groundwork laid in the Academy contributed to later advancements in scientific thought. One of the most notable aspects of the Academy was its openness to intellectual debate. Unlike the rigid traditions of the Egyptian priesthood or the hierarchical nature of some philosophical schools, the Academy encouraged discussion and critical questioning. Students engaged in dialectical reasoning, challenging each other's ideas and refining their own thoughts through structured argumentation. This method, rooted in the Socratic tradition, allowed for a dynamic exchange of ideas, making the Academy a hub of intellectual activity that attracted some of the greatest minds of the ancient world. Among the many students who studied at the Academy, the most famous was Aristotle. Arriving in Athens around 367 BCE, Aristotle spent nearly 2 decades under Plato's tutelage, absorbing and later challenging his teacher's ideas. While he deeply respected Plato, Aristotle eventually developed his own philosophical system, which diverged in key ways, particularly regarding metaphysics. Where Plato saw reality as divided between the world of forms and the material world, Aristotle sought to explain reality through observation, categorization, and empirical analysis. This philosophical divergence did not diminish the significance of the Academy's influence, but rather illustrated its role as a crucible of thought, where even the greatest minds were encouraged to develop their own perspectives. The Academy's influence extended far beyond the lifetime of Plato. It became a model for future centers of learning, inspiring institutions such as the Lyceum, founded by Aristotle, and later the great universities of the medieval and Renaissance periods. The systematic approach to knowledge that Plato introduced in the Academy laid the foundation for structured education in philosophy, science, and mathematics. Many of the disciplines studied in the Academy evolved into the academic fields recognized today. Plato's decision to establish the Academy was also a response to the political climate of Athens. The city's democratic system had condemned Socrates to death, exposing its vulnerabilities and the dangers of rule by uninformed popular opinion. By founding an institution dedicated to philosophical training, Plato sought to create a space where future leaders could be educated in wisdom and justice rather than mere persuasion or demagoguery. His hope was that the Academy would produce individuals capable of guiding society toward a more just and enlightened state. The physical location of the Academy was also significant. It was situated in a grove dedicated to the hero Academus, a serene and sacred space outside the bustling center of Athens. This setting provided a retreat for intellectual contemplation, away from the distractions of political life and the marketplace. The peaceful environment of the Academy allowed scholars to engage in philosophical inquiry without the pressures of public life, fostering an atmosphere conducive to deep thought and learning. Despite its intellectual rigor and its emphasis on rational inquiry, the Academy was not detached from the broader philosophical and political struggles of the time. Plato himself attempted to apply his ideas beyond the walls of the school, engaging with political leaders in Sicily in an effort to implement his vision of a philosopher king. His failed experiments in political reform underscored the challenges of translating philosophical ideals into practical governance, reinforcing his belief in the necessity of a strong educational foundation for rulers. As the academy continued to develop, it became more than just an institution for learning. It was a philosophical community. Scholars gathered not just to study but to live according to the principles they discussed, seeking wisdom in both theory and practice. This approach influenced later philosophical schools, such as the Stoics and Neoplatonists, who saw philosophy as a way of life rather than a purely intellectual exercise. Plato's legacy through the academy was profound. His dialogues became foundational texts in Western philosophy, studied and debated for centuries. The method of dialectical reasoning he promoted influenced not only philosophy but also legal thought, scientific inquiry, and theology. The idea that truth could be reached through structured argumentation and rational discourse became a defining characteristic of Western intellectual tradition. Even after Plato's death, the academy continued to flourish, evolving under the leadership of successive philosophers. It remained an active center of learning for centuries, adapting to new intellectual currents while maintaining its commitment to philosophical inquiry. The continuity of the academy demonstrated the enduring power of Plato's vision, proving that the pursuit of wisdom could transcend individual lifetimes and shape the course of intellectual history. The significance of the academy cannot be overstated. It was not merely a school but a revolutionary institution that redefined education, philosophy, and the nature of intellectual inquiry. Through it, Plato ensured that the ideas he had developed, shaped by Socrates, refined through his travels, and expanded through rigorous debate, would not be lost to time. Instead, they would be passed down, challenging and inspiring generations of thinkers to come. In the grand sweep of history, the academy stands as one of the most influential institutions of the ancient world, a testament to the power of ideas and the enduring impact of a philosopher's vision. Plato's commitment to knowledge, his belief in the transformative power of education, and his dedication to seeking truth laid the foundation for centuries of philosophical exploration. Through the academy, he not only honored the legacy of Socrates but also created a legacy of his own, one that continues to shape the intellectual landscape to this day. Plato's philosophy rests on the conviction that the material world is not the ultimate reality. Instead, he proposes that beyond what human senses perceive lies a higher realm of eternal, unchanging truths, the world of forms. This foundational idea, known as the theory of forms, distinguishes between the transient physical world and the immutable realm of perfect, abstract entities. While the material world is ever-changing and subject to decay, the world of forms is absolute, representing the true essence of things. A tree, for example, may wither, grow, or be cut down, but the concept of treeness remains unchanged. Likewise, individual human beings come and go, yet the idea of humanity persists. This distinction underscores Plato's belief that genuine knowledge is not derived from sensory experience, but from intellectual reasoning that allows one to grasp these eternal forms. To illustrate this distinction, Plato presents the allegory of the cave, one of his most famous metaphors, found in the Republic. In this allegory, a group of prisoners is chained inside a dark cave from birth, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire burns, and between the fire and the prisoners, unseen figures cast shadows of objects onto the wall. Because the prisoners have never seen anything outside the cave, they believe the shadows to be the only reality. If one of the prisoners were freed and exposed to the world outside, he would at first be blinded by the sunlight, struggling to adjust to the new reality. As his eyes adapted, he would see real objects instead of shadows, understanding that what he once took as truth was mere illusion. If he were to return to the cave and attempt to explain this new reality to the others, they would likely reject his claims, considering him mad and resisting any attempt to free them. This allegory serves as a powerful representation of Plato's epistemological and metaphysical ideas. The cave symbolizes the material world, where human beings are trapped in a state of ignorance, mistaking sensory perceptions for reality. The shadows on the wall represent the distorted reflections of the true forms, which exist beyond the physical realm. The journey of the freed prisoner signifies the philosopher's path to enlightenment, where he moves from opinion to knowledge, eventually comprehending the true nature of existence. The sun, which illuminates the real world outside the cave, represents the ultimate form, the form of the good, which is the source of all truth, knowledge, and existence. Plato insists that only philosophers, those who seek knowledge beyond appearances, can perceive the realm of forms. Most people remain bound to the illusions of the physical world, accepting opinions and beliefs shaped by sensory experiences. The philosopher, however, is driven by reason and the pursuit of absolute truth. This belief forms the basis of his argument in the Republic that society should be governed by philosopher kings, rulers who have ascended beyond the cave of ignorance and can lead with wisdom derived from the knowledge of the forms. The role of philosophers, then, is not only to seek truth for themselves but to return to society and guide others toward enlightenment, even if their insights are met with resistance. Plato's metaphysical framework raises fundamental questions about the nature of reality and knowledge. If the material world is only an imperfect reflection of the world of forms, how can human beings access true knowledge? He argues that while sensory perception is unreliable, reason allows individuals to grasp the eternal forms. Mathematics provides a useful analogy. Numbers and geometric principles exist independently of the physical world, and their truths remain unchanged regardless of particular instances. The concept of a perfect circle, for example, is never found in nature, yet human beings can understand and apply it in various contexts. This suggests that knowledge is not acquired through empirical observation alone but through intellectual insight into abstract realities. The influence of the theory of forms extends beyond metaphysics, shaping Plato's views on ethics, aesthetics, and politics. In ethics, he asserts that virtues such as justice, courage, and wisdom have perfect forms that transcend human behavior. An individual act of justice may be flawed or incomplete, but the form of justice itself is pure and immutable. The pursuit of virtue, therefore, involves striving to align human actions with these ideal forms. In aesthetics, Plato's theory leads him to question the role of art and representation. Since art imitates the material world, which in turn is only a reflection of the forms, it is twice removed from reality. This skepticism toward art influences his critique of poets and playwrights, whom he sees as misleading the public by presenting imitations rather than truths. Despite its profound impact, the theory of forms has faced criticism from both ancient and modern thinkers. One of the earliest challenges comes from Plato's own student, Aristotle, who questions the separation of forms from physical objects. Aristotle argues that forms do not exist in a separate, abstract realm but are instead inherent in the objects themselves. He sees no need for a transcendent reality to explain concepts like treeness or justice. Instead, he believes that by studying the natural world and its properties, one can arrive at an understanding of these principles. Aristotle's approach, grounded in observation and categorization, marks a significant departure from Plato's reliance on abstract ideals. Another issue that arises is what has been called the third man argument, a critique that originates within Plato's own dialogues. If every particular object derives its essence from a higher form, then each form must itself derive from an even higher form, leading to an infinite regress. For example, if individual men share in the form of man, then that form must also be related to a more abstract form, creating an endless hierarchy with no ultimate foundation. This paradox raises questions about the coherence of Plato's metaphysical system. In later philosophical traditions, Neoplatonism attempts to reconcile and refine Plato's ideas, particularly through the work of Plotinus. In his reinterpretation, the world of forms is integrated into a hierarchical structure where all existence emanates from a singular, ineffable source, the One. This adaptation influences early Christian theology, particularly in the writings of Augustine, who merges Platonic thought with Christian doctrine, portraying the world as an imperfect reflection of divine perfection. Throughout the medieval and Renaissance periods, Plato's ideas continue to shape discussions on metaphysics, knowledge, and the nature of existence. Modern philosophy, however, takes a more critical stance on the theory of forms. Empiricists such as John Locke and David Hume reject the notion of innate knowledge and argue that all ideas arise from sensory experience. They contend that abstract concepts are mental constructs rather than reflections of an independent metaphysical reality. Immanuel Kant, while influenced by Plato, modifies his ideas by proposing that human knowledge is shaped by innate categories of understanding rather than by access to a separate world of forms. These perspectives challenge the fundamental assumption that reality is divided into two distinct realms, shifting the focus toward human cognition and perception. Despite these criticisms, the theory of forms remains one of the most influential ideas in the history of philosophy. Its emphasis on the distinction between appearance and reality continues to resonate in discussions on epistemology, ethics, and metaphysics. The allegory of the cave, in particular, serves as a timeless metaphor for the struggle between ignorance and enlightenment, inspiring interpretations in literature, politics, and psychology. From Plato's own era to the present day, the question of what constitutes true reality remains central to philosophical inquiry, and his vision of a world beyond mere perception challenges thinkers to look beyond the surface and seek deeper understanding. Plato's metaphysical ideas, though subject to debate, provide a framework for exploring fundamental aspects of existence. Whether one accepts or rejects the notion of a separate realm of forms, the underlying principle, that reality is more than what is immediately apparent, continues to shape philosophical thought. His belief that knowledge transcends sensory experience, that truth must be pursued through reason, and that philosophers have a duty to seek and share wisdom remains at the core of philosophical tradition. The theory of forms, for all its complexities and contradictions, endures as a profound attempt to make sense of the nature of reality and human understanding. Plato's ethical philosophy is deeply connected to his broader metaphysical and political theories, particularly his concept of justice and the ideal state. He approaches ethics not as a set of external rules but as a pursuit of harmony within the soul and society. Virtue, for him, is not a mere convention or social construct but an essential quality tied to the nature of reality itself. He argues that true morality arises from knowledge. Specifically, the understanding of the forms, particularly the form of the good. This perspective makes ethics a matter of wisdom rather than subjective preference, emphasizing that only those who grasp the higher truths of existence can act virtuously. To explain how ethical behavior functions at the individual level, he develops the concept of the tripartite soul. In the Republic, he describes the soul as having three distinct parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Reason represents the rational, intellectual aspect of the soul, the part that seeks truth and wisdom. Spirit, or thumos, embodies emotions, courage, and the drive for honor and recognition. Appetite includes desires, physical urges, and material needs such as hunger, pleasure, and wealth. Each of these parts has its own role, but ethical harmony is achieved only when reason governs, ensuring that spirit and appetite function in accordance with rational wisdom. When appetite dominates, individuals become driven by hedonism and excess. When spirit takes control without guidance from reason, people may become overly ambitious, aggressive, or honor-driven without moral restraint. True virtue, he argues, comes when reason maintains control, guiding the soul toward a balanced and just existence. This vision of the soul is mirrored in his conception of justice in society. Just as the soul must be governed by reason to function harmoniously, a state must be structured in a way that reflects the proper order of the soul. In the Republic, he outlines an ideal society based on three classes: the ruling class, the auxiliaries, and the producers. The rulers, corresponding to reason in the soul, are the philosophers who have attained wisdom and understand the nature of justice. The auxiliaries, like spirit in the soul, are the warriors and protectors of the state, ensuring order and defending the city. The producers, akin to appetite, are those who engage in commerce, farming, and crafts, fulfilling society's material needs. Justice, in this framework, is a state in which each class performs its designated function without interference. When rulers govern wisely, auxiliaries enforce their policies with courage, and producers contribute through their work, the state thrives in harmony. His definition of justice, therefore, is not merely about laws or fairness in transactions but about the proper functioning of both individuals and the state. Justice occurs when every part of the whole performs its natural role, without disorder or conflict. Just as an individual achieves inner peace when reason governs the soul, a society is just when those best suited to rule, those with philosophical wisdom, govern with knowledge and virtue. In contrast, injustice arises when the natural order is disrupted, when rulers become corrupt, when the military takes control by force, or when the desires of the masses dominate governance. His perspective challenges the conventional view of justice as merely giving people what they deserve or following established legal codes. Instead, he argues that justice is about aligning human and social structures with the true nature of the good. The concept of the philosopher king emerges from this framework. In the Republic, he insists that the ideal ruler is not a warrior, a politician, or a wealthy elite but a philosopher, someone who has transcended the illusions of the material world and comprehended the forms, especially the form of the good. Just as a captain must understand navigation and not merely follow the whims of the crew, a ruler must possess wisdom rather than cater to popular opinion. He contends that the greatest flaw of existing political systems is that power is often held by those who lack true knowledge, leading to corruption, tyranny, and instability. Only those who have undergone rigorous intellectual training, freed from personal ambition and material desires, can govern in a way that ensures justice. To train such rulers, he proposes a strict educational system, beginning in childhood and continuing for decades. This education emphasizes philosophy, mathematics, dialectical reasoning, and moral development, designed to cultivate wisdom and self-discipline. Those who prove capable of grasping the forms, particularly the form of the good, are eventually prepared to rule, while those who fall short take on roles suited to their abilities. By structuring governance in this way, he envisions a society where rulers act not out of self-interest but for the collective good. His ethical philosophy has profound implications beyond politics. By linking virtue to knowledge, he suggests that moral failure is often the result of ignorance rather than malice. People do wrong, he argues, not because they consciously choose evil but because they misunderstand what is truly good. Someone who pursues wealth, pleasure, or power at the expense of justice does so because they mistake these things for genuine happiness. If they were properly educated and enlightened, they would recognize that true fulfillment comes from wisdom and alignment with the good. This belief informs his vision of an ideal society. Rather than punishing wrongdoing through force or coercion, the solution is to cultivate knowledge and reason so that people naturally desire what is just. However, his ethical theories have been widely debated. Critics argue that his model of justice is overly rigid, reducing individual freedom by assigning people to fixed roles within society. His vision of the philosopher king, while idealistic, raises concerns about the concentration of power in the hands of a select few, potentially leading to elitism or authoritarianism. Aristotle, one of his most prominent students, challenges his idea of the tripartite soul, suggesting instead that virtue arises through habit and practice rather than innate rational hierarchy. Later thinkers, especially in democratic traditions, reject his distrust of popular rule, advocating for systems where governance is based on participation rather than philosophical wisdom alone. Despite these critiques, his ethical philosophy continues to influence discussions on morality, justice, and governance. His tripartite soul offers a compelling framework for understanding human psychology, particularly the tensions between reason, emotion, and desire. His notion of justice as harmony remains relevant in modern debates on political structure, ethics, and social organization. His argument that moral knowledge is the key to virtue echoes in contemporary discussions on education, leadership, and personal development. Even his idea of the philosopher king finds resonance in modern debates on the role of intellectuals and experts in political decision-making. His ethical system ultimately presents a vision of human life where morality is not about external rules or arbitrary conventions but about achieving inner and societal harmony. Justice, both in the soul and in the state, emerges when every part functions as it should, guided by wisdom and the pursuit of the good. While his ideas remain open to critique, they continue to shape philosophical thought, offering profound insights into the nature of virtue, leadership, and human fulfillment. Plato's Republic is one of the most influential works in political philosophy, presenting a vision of an ideal state founded on justice, wisdom, and rational governance. It is not merely a treatise on politics but also an exploration of ethics, human nature, and the structure of reality. The dialogue, written as an extended conversation between Socrates and several interlocutors, seeks to answer a fundamental question: what is justice? In doing so, it constructs a model of a just society, one where individuals and classes function in harmony, guided by philosophical wisdom. The ideal state is built upon the same principles that govern the human soul, reflecting the tripartite structure of reason, spirit, and appetite. Just as an individual achieves inner harmony when reason controls the passions and emotions, a just society is one in which each class performs its proper role without interference. He divides society into three distinct groups: the ruling class, the auxiliaries, and the producers. The rulers are the philosopher kings, individuals who have attained wisdom and possess the knowledge necessary to govern justly. The auxiliaries are the warriors and protectors of the state, responsible for maintaining order and enforcing the decisions of the rulers. The producers, including farmers, artisans, and merchants, form the largest class, providing for the material needs of society. Each class corresponds to a part of the soul: rulers to reason, auxiliaries to spirit, and producers to appetite. Justice emerges when each class performs its function without overstepping its bounds, ensuring a stable and harmonious society. Education plays a crucial role in shaping the rulers of this ideal state. He insists that governance should not be based on wealth, birthright, or popular opinion but on intellectual and moral excellence. The path to becoming a ruler is long and rigorous, beginning in childhood with a carefully controlled curriculum. Young citizens are exposed to literature, music, and physical training designed to cultivate discipline and a love of wisdom. As they progress, their education shifts toward mathematics, dialectical reasoning, and abstract thought. Those who demonstrate exceptional ability and understanding continue their studies until they reach the highest level of knowledge, the form of the good. Only those who have grasped this ultimate truth are deemed fit to rule, as they are capable of making decisions based on objective wisdom rather than personal ambition or fleeting desires. This emphasis on education is not merely about acquiring skills but about shaping character. He believes that most people are influenced by their surroundings and impulses, making them susceptible to manipulation and irrational decisions. By training rulers to transcend these limitations, he aims to create a leadership class that governs with wisdom, ensuring that justice prevails. The philosopher king, in his view, is the only type of ruler who can resist corruption and rule in the best interest of society. Unlike contemporary political systems where power is often sought for personal gain, his vision demands that rulers be individuals who do not desire power but accept it as a duty for the greater good. His critique of existing political systems is central to the Republic. He is particularly critical of democracy, which he sees as a flawed and unstable form of government. He argues that democracy gives power to the masses, who are often driven by short-term desires rather than reasoned judgment. In a democracy, leaders are chosen based on popularity rather than wisdom, leading to a system where rhetoric and persuasion outweigh genuine knowledge. He warns that democracy can easily descend into chaos, as citizens, driven by unchecked freedoms and appetites, may turn against authority and undermine social order. In his view, democracy is not the highest form of government but a dangerous system that can give rise to tyranny. When people prioritize personal freedom above all else, they become vulnerable to demagogues, leaders who manipulate public opinion to seize absolute power. Oligarchy, the rule of the wealthy, fares little better in his assessment. He sees it as a system that prioritizes material wealth over virtue, allowing those with financial power to dominate governance. In an oligarchy, rulers make decisions based on self-interest, seeking to maintain their privileges while neglecting the well-being of the broader population. The pursuit of wealth leads to social inequality, where the rich grow richer while the poor are left without opportunities for advancement. This imbalance creates resentment and division, eventually leading to the downfall of the state. In both democracy and oligarchy, governance is driven by desires, whether the collective desires of the masses or the private interests of the elite, rather than reason and justice. His political vision, though highly structured and rigid by modern standards, offers insights that continue to resonate in contemporary debates. His concern about democracy's susceptibility to populism and manipulation is reflected in discussions about the role of media, misinformation, and the influence of special interests in politics. His warning about oligarchy aligns with modern critiques of economic inequality and the ways in which wealth shapes governance. While few contemporary political theorists advocate for a strictly hierarchical society like the one he envisions, his emphasis on the importance of education, wisdom, and moral integrity in leadership remains a relevant ideal. Comparisons between his ideal state and modern political theories reveal both contrasts and parallels. Unlike liberal democracies, which emphasize individual rights and equality, his republic prioritizes social harmony and the collective good, often at the expense of personal freedom. While modern systems favor elected representatives and participatory governance, his model relies on a highly selective ruling class trained in philosophy and reason. His vision is more closely aligned with meritocratic and technocratic ideas, where governance is entrusted to those with specialized knowledge rather than the general populace. However, his critique of unregulated democracy finds echoes in modern concerns about political polarization, short-term policymaking, and the influence of public opinion on decision-making. Despite its limitations, his political philosophy has had a profound impact on the development of political thought. His ideas influenced later thinkers such as Aristotle, who refined and critiqued many aspects of the Republic. His vision of an ideal state provided a foundation for discussions on justice, governance, and the role of education in shaping leaders. His belief that political systems should be designed to cultivate virtue rather than merely manage power challenges the notion that politics is purely a matter of compromise and negotiation. Instead, he presents an aspirational model, one that seeks to align human society with the highest truths of existence. His work invites reflection on the nature of justice and the responsibilities of leadership. While his republic may not be a practical blueprint for modern governance, its underlying principles, wisdom, discipline, and the pursuit of the common good, continue to inspire debates on how societies should be structured. His ideal ruler, the philosopher king, may not exist in reality, but the aspiration for leaders who govern with knowledge and integrity remains a central concern in political philosophy. His critique of democracy and oligarchy, though written over 2 millennia ago, still serves as a cautionary analysis of the challenges inherent in political systems. By seeking to understand his vision, one gains not only insight into ancient philosophy but also a deeper appreciation for the enduring questions that shape human civilization. Plato's exploration of aesthetics and the role of art in society is deeply intertwined with his philosophical vision of truth, justice, and the ideal state. His treatment of poetry and art is one of the most debated aspects of his philosophy, particularly his critique of Homer and the notion of artistic censorship. He sees art primarily as an imitation of reality, a concept known as mimesis, and argues that it has the potential to mislead and corrupt individuals rather than lead them toward wisdom. His views on aesthetics are closely linked to his metaphysical ideas, particularly the theory of forms, which distinguishes between the world of perfect, eternal realities and the flawed, ever-changing material world. For him, poetry and art do not convey truth but rather offer distorted representations of reality. He argues that artists, including poets, create mere copies of the material world, which itself is only an imperfect reflection of the higher realm of forms. In this way, art is twice removed from true reality, making it deceptive and unreliable as a source of knowledge. The problem with artistic representation, he contends, is that it appeals to human emotions rather than reason. Drama and poetry, particularly the works of Homer and other epic poets, evoke strong passions, encouraging individuals to react based on feeling rather than rational judgment. This is particularly dangerous in his vision of the ideal state, where citizens should cultivate reason and self-discipline rather than succumb to uncontrolled emotions. His critique of Homer is central to his argument for artistic censorship. He believes that Homer's epics, while foundational to Greek culture, depict the gods and heroes in ways that undermine moral and philosophical ideals. The gods in Homeric poetry are often portrayed as deceitful, vengeful, and capricious, engaging in immoral behaviors that would be unacceptable for human beings, let alone divine entities. For Plato, such representations corrupt the minds of the youth, encouraging them to adopt flawed moral standards. He argues that if art is to be permitted in the ideal state, it must serve an educational purpose, promoting virtues such as wisdom, courage, and justice rather than mere entertainment or emotional gratification. This perspective leads him to advocate for strict regulation of artistic expression. In the Republic, he famously suggests that poets and dramatists should be excluded from the ideal state unless their work contributes to the moral and intellectual development of citizens. He believes that art should not merely imitate reality but should instead guide individuals toward truth and ethical living. By controlling artistic narratives, he hopes to shape a society where individuals are not misled by illusions but are instead oriented toward higher philosophical ideals. This notion of censorship has been one of the most controversial aspects of his philosophy, raising questions about the limits of artistic freedom and the role of the state in regulating cultural expression. His views on aesthetics stand in sharp contrast to those of his student, Aristotle, who offers a more nuanced and appreciative perspective on art. While he sees art as a misleading imitation, Aristotle argues that art, particularly tragedy, serves a valuable function in human experience. Aristotle introduces the concept of catharsis, suggesting that tragedy allows individuals to purge their emotions in a controlled and meaningful way, ultimately contributing to psychological balance and moral reflection. Unlike Plato, who sees art as a threat to reason, Aristotle acknowledges its power to convey deep truths about human nature, ethics, and the complexities of life. This debate between master and student highlights a fundamental tension in philosophical aesthetics, whether art should be judged based on its capacity to reveal truth or its impact on human emotions. While he remains skeptical of art's ability to contribute to knowledge, Aristotle embraces its potential to engage audiences in moral and philosophical inquiry. Their differing perspectives have shaped the course of Western aesthetics, influencing later debates about the role of literature, drama, and visual art in society. As his philosophical thought evolved, his later works reflect a shift from the idealistic vision of the Republic to a more pragmatic approach in the Laws and the Statesman. While the Republic presents a theoretical model of the perfect state, largely governed by philosopher kings and a rigid class structure, his later writings acknowledge the complexities and practical challenges of governance. In the Laws, his final and most detailed work on political philosophy, he moves away from the idea that philosophers alone should rule and instead focuses on the importance of legal systems in maintaining social order. One of the most significant changes in his later philosophy is his recognition of the necessity of laws in regulating human behavior. In the Republic, he envisions a society where rulers govern based on wisdom and knowledge of the forms, making laws somewhat secondary. However, in the Laws, he acknowledges that in practical governance, laws must serve as a guiding framework for justice and stability. Since most rulers and citizens are not philosopher kings, a well-structured legal system is essential to ensuring that society functions harmoniously. This shift from an idealistic reliance on wisdom to a pragmatic focus on legal institutions marks a crucial evolution in his political thought. In The Statesman, he explores the nature of leadership and the qualities required for effective governance. He moves beyond the rigid classifications of rulers, auxiliaries, and producers and instead examines the role of statesmen as individuals who must balance wisdom, power, and adaptability. He acknowledges that different forms of government may be necessary depending on historical and cultural circumstances, a departure from the strict political hierarchy outlined in the Republic. While he still values knowledge as the highest guiding principle, he begins to recognize that political leadership requires practical judgment and flexibility rather than rigid adherence to abstract ideals. This transition from idealism to pragmatism reflects his increasing concern with the real-world application of philosophy. While his earlier works focus on constructing theoretical models of the ideal state, his later writings engage more deeply with the challenges of governance, lawmaking, and political organization. This shift also reflects his recognition that human societies are inherently imperfect, and that governance must account for human nature rather than impose unrealistic standards. Despite these modifications, his core philosophical principles remain consistent throughout his works. He continues to emphasize the importance of reason, justice, and the pursuit of truth in all aspects of life, whether in politics, ethics, or education. His later works, while more grounded in practical concerns, do not abandon his belief in the superiority of wisdom as the foundation of good governance. Instead, they reflect an attempt to reconcile his idealistic vision with the realities of human society. His legacy in political philosophy, aesthetics, and ethics remains one of the most influential in Western thought. His critique of art has shaped discussions on censorship, the moral responsibilities of artists, and the power of representation. His vision of an ideal state continues to inspire debates on governance, justice, and the role of education in shaping citizens. His later works, particularly The Laws, offer insights into the necessity of legal systems in maintaining order, a theme that remains central to contemporary political theory. While his ideas have been both celebrated and criticized, their enduring relevance speaks to the depth and complexity of his thought. His exploration of the tension between idealism and pragmatism, the role of art in shaping society, and the importance of wisdom in leadership continues to resonate in modern discussions on philosophy, politics, and culture. Through his dialogues, he invites readers to engage in critical inquiry, challenging them to reflect on the fundamental questions of existence, governance, and the nature of truth. Plato and Aristotle, though united by their shared lineage as philosopher and student, represent two of the most defining and contrasting perspectives in Western philosophy. Their differences lie at the very foundation of metaphysics, ethics, political thought, and epistemology, shaping centuries of philosophical discourse. While Plato embraced idealism, Aristotle grounded his philosophy in empiricism, diverging significantly from his mentor's emphasis on abstract, transcendent realities. The contrast between their philosophies remains one of the most significant intellectual tensions in the history of thought, with each offering a distinct path toward understanding knowledge, existence, and governance. At the heart of their differences lies Plato's theory of forms, which posits that true reality consists of eternal, unchanging archetypes or forms, existing beyond the material world. To Plato, the material world is an imperfect copy of these higher realities, and knowledge comes from understanding these ideal forms rather than sensory experience. This notion places truth in an abstract realm, accessible only through reason and intellectual contemplation. Aristotle, in contrast, rejects this dualistic view, arguing that reality is grounded in the physical world. He emphasizes observation and experience as the means to acquire knowledge, maintaining that substances are not mere shadows of higher forms but the fundamental components of reality. He believes that understanding comes through studying the nature of objects themselves, classifying them based on their properties and causes. This shift from transcendent idealism to empirical observation marks one of the greatest philosophical departures between the two. Their ethical philosophies also reflect this divide. Plato's ethics is built upon the concept of the tripartite soul, where reason must govern spirit and appetite, leading individuals toward justice and harmony. Moral virtue, in his view, is an alignment with the rational order of the universe, achievable through philosophical enlightenment. Aristotle, however, approaches ethics through a more practical framework, emphasizing virtue as a habit formed through experience. His concept of the golden mean suggests that moral virtue is a balance between extremes, cultivated through practice rather than innate knowledge of ideal forms. Unlike Plato, who sees ethical knowledge as a pursuit of transcendent truth, Aristotle argues that virtue is developed through lived experiences and social interactions. Their political philosophies further illustrate their contrasting worldviews. Plato's ideal state, as outlined in the Republic, is based on rigid class divisions, where philosopher kings possessing knowledge of the forms rule over society. He envisions a highly structured society in which rulers govern not through democratic consensus but through wisdom and rational insight. Aristotle, in Politics, takes a more empirical approach, studying actual city-states to determine the best form of governance. He recognizes the value of different governmental structures, arguing that a constitutional polity, blending democracy and aristocracy, is the most stable. While Plato sees an idealized state guided by philosophical rulers, Aristotle values pragmatic governance that adapts to social realities rather than conforming to abstract ideals. Despite these divergences, Aristotle builds upon many of Plato's ideas, refining and modifying them rather than wholly rejecting them. His rejection of the theory of forms does not mean he dismisses the pursuit of knowledge, but rather seeks to ground it in observable reality. His ethical framework, though more practical, still aligns with Plato's notion that virtue is central to a good life. In Politics, though he criticizes Plato's utopianism, he retains the idea that governance must be guided by wisdom and virtue. Their philosophical dialogue, even in opposition, sets the foundation for centuries of intellectual development, influencing countless thinkers who sought to reconcile or further distinguish their views. Plato's influence extends far beyond his own era, shaping the trajectory of Western thought through multiple intellectual traditions. One of the most significant ways in which his philosophy endured was through its profound impact on early Christianity and Neoplatonism. The concept of a higher, transcendent reality, separate from the material world, aligns closely with Christian theology, particularly in the works of St. Augustine, who integrates Platonic ideas into Christian doctrine. Augustine's interpretation of the soul's ascent to divine truth echoes Plato's vision of enlightenment through reason, reinforcing the idea that ultimate reality lies beyond the physical world. The notion of divine forms finds resonance in Christian metaphysics, where God represents the highest and most perfect being, akin to Plato's form of the good. Neoplatonism, developed by philosophers such as Plotinus, further expands on Plato's metaphysical ideas, emphasizing the emanation of all existence from a singular divine source. This school of thought profoundly influences medieval philosophy, bridging the gap between ancient Greek ideas and the theological frameworks of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The Neoplatonic vision of reality as a structured hierarchy, with a material world existing as a mere reflection of higher truths, shapes theological and mystical traditions across various cultures. Plato's vision of the philosopher's journey toward wisdom is mirrored in the religious quest for divine knowledge, solidifying his enduring relevance in spiritual and philosophical discourse. The Renaissance marks another crucial revival of Platonic thought, as scholars and intellectuals, inspired by ancient texts, reintegrate his ideas into art, literature, and political theory. The rediscovery of the Republic, the Symposium, and other dialogues sparks renewed discussions on justice, beauty, and governance, influencing figures such as Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola. The Platonic Academy in Florence, founded during this period, becomes a center for studying and interpreting Plato's works, merging his philosophy with emerging humanist ideals. His emphasis on ideal forms and the pursuit of intellectual perfection finds expression in Renaissance art and literature, where beauty is often depicted as a reflection of divine order. In modern philosophy, Plato's influence persists through thinkers such as Kant, Hegel, and Nietzsche, each engaging with his ideas in distinct ways. Kant's distinction between the noumenal and phenomenal realms echoes Plato's division between the world of forms and the material world. For Kant, true knowledge exists beyond mere sensory experience, aligning with Plato's notion that reason grants access to higher truths. Hegel, though critical of Plato's ideal state, adopts a dialectical approach to history and knowledge, reminiscent of the Socratic method. He envisions the development of ideas as a process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, a structure that mirrors Plato's dialectical discussions. Nietzsche, on the other hand, presents a radical critique of Plato, rejecting his idealism as a denial of life's immediate reality. He sees Plato's emphasis on transcendent truth as the foundation for later religious and moral structures that suppress individual will and vitality. In contrast to Plato's vision of objective moral order, Nietzsche champions a philosophy of life affirmation, where values are created rather than discovered. Despite this opposition, Nietzsche's engagement with Plato underscores the depth of Plato's philosophical legacy, as even those who reject his ideas must contend with their influence. In contemporary political theory and ethics, Plato remains a foundational figure. His critique of democracy, particularly his warnings about the dangers of populism and unqualified leadership, continues to resonate in modern debates about governance. His vision of a just society, where rulers are chosen based on wisdom rather than wealth or popularity, raises enduring questions about meritocracy and political responsibility. While his rigid class structure is often criticized, his belief in the necessity of education for leadership informs contemporary discussions on political philosophy and civic responsibility. In ethics, his ideas on justice and virtue ethics provide a framework for understanding moral character and responsibility. His notion of the philosopher king as an enlightened ruler finds echoes in discussions on ethical leadership and governance. The emphasis on rational inquiry and moral development in education remains relevant in contemporary debates about the role of philosophy in public life. His dialogues, which encourage critical thinking and the examination of deeply held beliefs, continue to serve as a model for philosophical inquiry and discourse. Through his engagement with fundamental questions of existence, knowledge, and governance, Plato's influence endures across centuries and disciplines. His philosophical dialogue with Aristotle sets the foundation for future intellectual developments, while his impact on Christianity, Renaissance thought, and modern philosophy ensures his continued relevance. Whether through direct adoption or critical opposition, his ideas continue to shape the way we think about truth, justice, and the nature of reality. His philosophy, grounded in the search for higher wisdom, remains a vital force in intellectual history, inspiring generations of thinkers to explore the deepest questions of human existence. Plato's impact on philosophy, politics, ethics, and metaphysics remains one of the most enduring intellectual legacies in human history. As one of the foundational figures of Western thought, his ideas have shaped centuries of philosophical discourse, influencing disciplines as diverse as political science, theology, and psychology. His exploration of truth, justice, governance, and reality continues to offer profound insights into the nature of human existence. The intellectual traditions that followed him, spanning from Aristotle to contemporary thinkers, have either built upon or challenged his ideas, but none have been able to ignore the weight of his contributions. His role in preserving and expanding Socratic thought cemented his position as a key link in the history of philosophy. Without his dialogues, much of Socrates' philosophy might have been lost to time, as Socrates himself left no written works. Through Plato's writings, the Socratic method became a cornerstone of philosophical inquiry, emphasizing rigorous questioning and dialectical reasoning. This method remains an essential part of modern education, particularly in law, ethics, and critical thinking. The art of engaging in thoughtful dialogue, challenging assumptions, and seeking deeper truths owes much to Plato's legacy. His works continue to serve as a foundation for intellectual pursuit, shaping how philosophy is both taught and practiced. Beyond his role in preserving Socratic thought, Plato himself made original and revolutionary contributions to philosophy. His theory of forms, though widely debated and critiqued, introduced the notion that reality consists of more than just what is observable. This idea provided the basis for later metaphysical inquiries and influenced religious and philosophical traditions that emphasize an ultimate, unchanging truth beyond the material world. Even though Aristotle and later philosophers moved away from his idealism, the fundamental question he raised, whether reality is based on sensory experience or abstract ideals, remains central to philosophical debate. His ethical philosophy, particularly his concept of the tripartite soul, continues to inform discussions on human psychology and moral reasoning. The idea that human nature is composed of rational, spirited, and appetitive elements aligns with modern psychological theories that explore the balance between reason, emotion, and desire. While contemporary psychology uses scientific methods rather than philosophical speculation, the basic insight that different forces drive human behavior is one that still holds relevance. His discussions on virtue, justice, and the role of wisdom in governance continue to shape ethical theory and political thought. Politically, his influence remains significant, particularly in his critique of democracy. His concerns about the instability of democratic governance, where uninformed or manipulative leaders can gain power through persuasion rather than wisdom, are often revisited in modern political discourse. While contemporary democratic systems are far more developed than those of ancient Athens, the issues he identified, such as the role of education in governance, the dangers of populism, and the balance between individual liberty and state control, remain as relevant as ever. His idea of the philosopher king, while unrealistic in its strictest sense, still serves as an ideal for ethical leadership, emphasizing wisdom and justice over personal ambition. His works continue to be studied extensively in academic settings, forming a central part of curricula in philosophy, political science, and literature. Institutions worldwide regard his dialogues as essential reading for understanding foundational philosophical questions. The Republic, the Symposium, and the Phaedrus remain widely taught, their themes extending beyond philosophy into discussions of politics, love, and human nature. The method of reasoning he employed, posing hypothetical questions, engaging in logical discourse, and systematically dismantling weak arguments, continues to shape how philosophy is approached in modern scholarship. Plato's continued relevance is not limited to academic philosophy. His ideas have permeated various fields, from literature to psychology, from political science to education. The influence of his metaphysical inquiries can be seen in existentialist and idealist philosophies. His ethical concerns resonate in contemporary debates on morality, and his political theories continue to inform discussions on governance and justice. His thought extends into literature and the arts, where the question of imitation versus reality, central to his criticism of art, still sparks debate in aesthetic theory. His reflections on love, as articulated in the Symposium, have influenced everything from Renaissance poetry to contemporary discussions on the nature of relationships. The Renaissance revival of Platonic thought demonstrated that his philosophy was not confined to antiquity, but could be reinterpreted in different historical contexts. Thinkers such as Marsilio Ficino reintroduced Plato's ideas, merging them with theological concepts and Renaissance humanism. In the Enlightenment, philosophers engaged with his ideas on reason and justice, debating their applicability to emerging democratic institutions. Even in the 20th and 21st centuries, his influence persists in fields as varied as existentialist thought, psychoanalysis, and political theory. His vision of a just society, though critiqued, remains a reference point in discussions about social order and governance. His legacy is not static. It evolves as new interpretations and critiques emerge. Modern thinkers continue to engage with his dialogues, either by refining his ideas or challenging them. The persistent tension between idealism and realism, between abstract principles and empirical observation, remains a philosophical battleground shaped by his intellectual framework. While many have moved away from his rigid metaphysical structures, the fundamental questions he posed, about knowledge, morality, and the best way to organize society, are as urgent today as they were in his time. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of his legacy is his ability to provoke thought. His dialogues do not merely present conclusions but invite readers to question, analyze, and refine their understanding of fundamental concepts. This open-ended nature of his philosophy ensures that his works do not become outdated but remain dynamic texts that encourage intellectual engagement. The act of questioning itself, of seeking deeper truths, is one of his greatest gifts to the world. In the end, Plato's influence cannot be confined to a single discipline or era. His thoughts continue to shape how societies conceptualize justice, governance, ethics, and knowledge. His critiques of democracy, though controversial, remain insightful in understanding modern political challenges. His discussions on love and beauty continue to influence literature and art. His vision of education as a means to cultivate wisdom resonates in contemporary discussions on pedagogy. He is not merely a figure of the past but a philosopher whose ideas continue to inspire new generations of thinkers, ensuring that his intellectual legacy remains as relevant today as it was over 2,000 years ago.